Ex-son-in-law threatened to cut us off from our grandkids unless we spoil his 6 kids too. You never think you're going to be the one to lose a kid. Like, you know what happens to people. You hear about it on the news, or maybe you know someone who knows someone, but when it happens to you, man, it just hits you in a way nothing else does. Brianna, my youngest, was the light of our lives. She was one of those people who could light up a room just by walking into it. You'd hear her laugh before you even saw her. And as a mom, you just don't imagine anything could take that away. You always think you'll go first, that you'll be there for them when they're old and wrinkly. But life doesn't care about your plans, does it? Brianna got sick when Zach and Mia were still pretty young, like 8 and 9. And I don't mean just a little sick. I mean, the kind of sick where you spend every other day in the hospital, where you can't remember what normal feels like anymore. It wasn't long before it was clear that this wasn't something she was going to walk away from. Her husband Kevin checked out early. I mean, physically he was there, but it was like he couldn't deal. He stopped showing up for her in the ways that mattered. I'm not here to bash him. Okay, maybe I am. But like, when your wife is going through the hardest thing she'll ever go through, that's when you step up, right? Kevin didn't. He just kind of let everything fall on us. Me and my husband were the ones taking her to her treatments, watching the kids, trying to keep everything from falling apart. I'll never forget one of the last conversations I had with Brianna. She was so tired, Not just from the illness, but from worrying about what would happen to her kids when she wasn't there anymore. She told me she was scared Kevin would replace her, that he'd bring some new woman in and the kids would forget her. And man, when your kid looks at you like that, so scared and so helpless, you make promises you never thought you'd have to make. I told her we'd always be there for Zach and Mia, that we'd make sure they'd always remember their mom and know how much she loved them. She made me swear we'd look out for them no matter what, and I did. I meant it too. When she finally passed, I don't know how to explain it. It's like there's this huge hole in your chest where your heart used to be, and nothing can fill it. But we had to stay strong for Zach and Mia. They were devastated, and we were all they had left of their mom. I remember how Zach wouldn't let go of Brianna's hand, even after she was gone, like he thought if he just held on tight enough, she wouldn't leave. Mia barely said anything for weeks. The way they grieved, it broke my heart all over again. We tried to hold everything together, but Kevin? 8 months. 8 months after Brianna passed, this man moved some woman, Cindy, into their house. I still remember the first time Zach and Mia told me about her. It was like they were scared to say her name, like just talking about her was betraying their mom. I won't lie, I hated her before I even met her. Not because of who she was, but because of what she represented. It was too soon. Brianna hadn't even been gone a year, and he was already playing house with someone else. It felt like a slap in the face. Cindy, by the way, came with her own set of baggage. She had a kid from some other guy, and if that wasn't enough, she was pregnant with Kevin's kid too. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. But the worst part wasn't Cindy herself. It was the fact that Kevin acted like this was normal. Like we were all just supposed to pretend that this was some natural progression. He even had the audacity to suggest that we treat Cindy's kid like our own grandkid. Now, I love kids. I've raised 3 of them, and I'd go to the ends of the earth for my grandchildren. But let me be clear, Cindy's kid was not my grandchild. I wasn't about to sit there and pretend otherwise. But Kevin, in his infinite wisdom, decided to lay down some rules. He said that if we wanted to stay in Zach and Mia's lives, we had to accept Cindy's kid as part of the package deal. Like, are you serious? We had to treat her kid like one of our own or else risk losing our relationship with Zach and Mia? He tried to dress it up like it was all about giving the kids a chance to form new family bonds without us interfering. But I saw right through that crap. It was him trying to wipe away Brianna's memory. He wanted to replace her with this new woman and her kids, and that wasn't happening on my watch. No way. At that point, we were backed into a corner. We loved Zach and Mia more than anything, and the idea of losing them was unbearable. So we talked to a lawyer. Turns out we could get grandparents' visitation rights, and we went for it. Yeah, it was a messy, painful process, but in the end we got what we wanted, time with Zach and Mia. It wasn't a lot at first, just weekends here and there, but it was enough to keep that connection strong. And let me tell you, Zach and Mia made it clear from day one that they had no interest in their dad's new family. They came to our house, and it was like a weight lifted off their shoulders. They didn't have to play nice with Cindy or pretend like everything was okay. They could just be themselves. They could talk about their mom, laugh about old memories, and not feel guilty about it. Kevin never liked it, though. I could see it every time he dropped them off or picked them up. He knew they weren't bonding with Cindy's kid or the new baby, and he hated that. But that wasn't my problem. My only concern was Zach and Mia. They were my family, and I wasn't going to let anyone take them away from me. Things were already pretty tense after Kevin brought Cindy into the picture, but what really kicked it up a notch was when he started pushing this package deal nonsense. At first I thought maybe he was just trying to find a way to blend their families, but it wasn't like that. It felt more like he wanted to erase the past and start over, and that meant wiping out anything that connected Zach and Mia to their mom, Brianna. It was like he wanted us to pretend Brianna never existed, like her death gave him a clean slate to do whatever he wanted with no consequences. One day, Kevin calls me up and says he wants to have a family meeting. I didn't like the sound of that. Family meetings with Kevin usually meant he was going to try and guilt trip us or pull some new stunt, but I didn't want to refuse. I was still trying to keep things civil enough for the sake of Zach and Mia. So my husband and I show up at their place, and Cindy's there, sitting at the table with her kid on her lap, looking like she's got something real important to say. I knew right then this was going to be bad. Kevin starts off all polite, talking about how things have been hard on the kids since Brianna passed, and how much he appreciates us being in their lives. I'm sitting there thinking, okay, what's the catch? And then he drops it. He says, Cindy and I want to make sure all the kids grow up as one big happy family, and for that to happen, we need your support. I just sat there waiting for him to get to the point. He goes on to say, we want you to start treating Cindy's daughter like she's your grandchild. We're a package deal now, and if you can't accept that, it's going to make things really difficult for Zach and Mia. I could feel my blood pressure rising. I mean, what? I wasn't even sure how to respond at first. This guy was telling us that if we wanted to see our own grandkids, we had to treat Cindy's kid, who's got nothing to do with us, like she was ours too? Like, I'm sorry, but that's not how this works. My husband, always the more level-headed one, tried to stay calm. He said, we're here for Zach and Mia, and we always will be. But we can't just pretend someone else's child is our grandkid. It doesn't work that way. Kevin didn't like that answer at all. His whole demeanor changed in a second. He went from Mr. Polite to straight up angry. He slammed his hand on the table and said, if you can't accept this family, then maybe you shouldn't be part of it at all. I was fuming at this point. I said, excuse me? We've been here for Zach and Mia since day one. We were there when you weren't. And now you want to tell us we're not part of their lives unless we play along with this fantasy of yours? Cindy, who had been sitting there quietly this whole time, finally chimed in. She said, we just want what's best for the kids. They need stability, and part of that is accepting this new family dynamic. We're not trying to replace Brianna, but we need to move forward. The audacity of her saying that, like she hadn't just waltzed into the picture barely a year after Brianna was gone, drove me crazy. I wanted to yell, to scream, but I knew that wouldn't help Zach and Mia. So I took a deep breath and said, we're here for our grandkids, and nothing's going to change that. But we're not here to play make-believe with someone else's child. Kevin just stared at me, like he couldn't believe I was standing my ground. Then he said something I'll never forget. He said, if you can't accept all of us, you'll lose all of us. It felt like a punch in the gut. I mean, this guy was actually threatening to take away our grandkids unless we played by his rules. I looked over at my husband, and I could tell he was thinking the same thing I was. We couldn't let that happen. But at the same time, I wasn't going to let Kevin manipulate us into pretending something that wasn't real. Cindy's kid wasn't our grandchild, and I wasn't going to pretend she was just to keep Kevin happy. The rest of the meeting was basically a standoff. Kevin wasn't backing down, and neither were we. It was clear we weren't going to come to any kind of agreement that day, so we left, not really knowing what was going to happen next. The drive home was quiet. My husband and I didn't say much, but I could tell we were both worried about the same thing. What if Kevin really did cut us off from Zach and Mia? What if he followed through on his threat? A few days later, we got a call from Kevin. He told us that unless we agreed to his terms, we wouldn't be allowed to see the kids anymore. It was exactly what we feared. My heart sank, but I wasn't about to let him bully us into submission. That's when we decided to talk to a lawyer. It wasn't an easy decision, but we knew we had to fight for Zach and Mia. We weren't going to let Kevin take them away from us just because we refused to play along with his package deal fantasy. Our lawyer told us we had a good case for grandparents' visitation rights, given how close we were to Zach and Mia and how much we had been involved in their lives. It wasn't going to be easy, but we had a chance. When we told Kevin we were taking legal action, he flipped. He accused us of trying to destroy his new family, of not caring about what was best for the kids. But I knew that wasn't true. We cared more about Zach and Mia than anything, and that's why we were willing to fight for them. The court process was stressful and dragged out, but in the end, we got what we wanted. Visitation rights with Zach and Mia. It wasn't as much time as we had before, but it was enough. And the best part was that Zach and Mia made it clear they still wanted to be part of our lives. They didn't care about their dad's threats or his new family. They cared about us, and that was all that mattered. Update 1. By the time we had our visitation rights sorted, things started changing in Kevin's world, and not for the better. I wasn't surprised, though. I always had a gut feeling that his choices were going to catch up to him sooner or later. You can't just blow up your family and pretend like everything's fine. For starters, Kevin's relationship with his own family went down the drain. His parents, siblings, they all distanced themselves after what he pulled. They were always close with Brianna, and it didn't sit right with them how fast he moved on. One day he's burying his wife, and the next he's playing house with Cindy and her kid. I guess his parents couldn't get on board with that, and they started fading out of his life. He wasn't talking to them much, and when he did, it was just arguments about the way he was handling things. Honestly, that's when I realized just how much of a mess Kevin's life had become. I mean, it's one thing to lose your wife, but to then alienate your entire family in the process? That's on you. I can't say I felt bad for him. I was still angry at him for trying to control how we were supposed to act around Zach and Mia, but at the same time, I knew this wasn't just affecting him. It was dragging Zach and Mia down too. Then there was Cindy's side of the family, and trust me, they were just as distant. I don't know all the details, but from what I gathered, Cindy's family wasn't exactly thrilled about her bringing Kevin into the picture. They weren't close to begin with, and now that she had moved in with a guy who had his own baggage, it seemed like they'd washed their hands of her. So now Kevin was stuck in this house with 6 kids, and no one was willing to help him out. It was just him and Cindy, and honestly, they were both drowning. Zach and Mia told me little things here and there about how things were going at home. They never outright complained, but you could tell things weren't great. Zach mentioned that Cindy's first kid, from her previous relationship, was acting out a lot. I guess the poor kid was confused, didn't know where she fit in this mess of a blended family. I mean, she had her mom, but her dad was out of the picture, and now she was living with Kevin, who probably didn't treat her much differently than we did. Not like his own. That kind of stuff messes with a kid's head. And then there were the 2 new kids, Kevin's and Cindy's, both under 5 years old, running around the house while Zach and Mia were trying to keep their heads down and survive. You could tell they weren't really part of that new family. They were Brianna's kids, not Cindy's. And no matter how hard Kevin tried to push that package deal, it was clear the lines were drawn. At first, I thought maybe Zach and Mia would start pulling away from us because of all this. Like maybe they'd feel bad for not bonding with their half-siblings, or start falling in line with their dad's new family. But nope. If anything, they wanted to spend more time with us. They were both teenagers by then, and teenagers have a pretty good sense of who they want to be around. And it wasn't Kevin or Cindy. They were always calling, asking if they could come over for the weekend or stay during breaks. And of course, we always said yes. We made sure Zach and Mia had everything they needed when they were with us. We didn't want them feeling like they were missing out on anything just because their home life was falling apart. I'll admit we spoiled them more than maybe some grandparents would, but I felt like we had to. They deserved it after everything they'd been through. Kevin, though, he wasn't happy about that. He made it clear he thought we were giving them too much, making things too easy for them. He said they needed to learn responsibility and that we were undermining his parenting. I almost laughed when he said that, because what parenting was he even talking about? From what I could see, he wasn't doing much of it. One time, Zach came over to our place and showed me some new shoes he'd gotten from Kevin. They were cheap, falling apart after just a few weeks. Zach wasn't complaining, but I could tell he was embarrassed. That's when I took him out and got him a proper pair of shoes, the kind that would actually last. Kevin found out about it later and threw a fit. He said we were making him look bad in front of his own son. But the thing is, I wasn't trying to show him up. I just wanted Zach to have something decent. It was stuff like that that really started to grind on Kevin. He didn't like that Zach and Mia were more excited about spending time with us than with him. And it wasn't just about material things either. When they came to our place, they could relax, be themselves, and not have to worry about the chaos going on at home. That's what bothered Kevin the most. The more Kevin lost control of his own family, the more he tried to blame us for it. He'd say stuff like, "You're spoiling them, and it's making them ungrateful." Or, "They're never going to respect me as their father if you keep undermining everything I'm trying to teach them." But what was he really teaching them? How to live in a dysfunctional house with a revolving door of step-siblings and no real support? Yeah, no thanks. Things came to a head when Zach and Mia both told Kevin they didn't want to be around their younger siblings anymore. It was too much. They said they felt like babysitters, always having to look after the little ones while Kevin and Cindy did, well, whatever it is they did. That's when Kevin really started to freak out. He realized that the big happy family he had been trying to force wasn't happening. His older kids didn't want to be part of it, and his younger kids weren't getting any of the attention they needed. It was a total mess. By this point, Kevin was starting to see the walls closing in. His family was gone, Cindy's family was gone, and now Zach and Mia were spending as much time as possible away from him. He was isolated, and he didn't know how to handle it. The more desperate he got, the more he tried to guilt us into helping with the other kids. He said things like, "You're tearing this family apart," or, "If you really cared about Zach and Mia, you'd care about their siblings too." But I wasn't buying it. It wasn't our job to clean up his mess. We were there for Zach and Mia, and that wasn't going to change. Update 2. It all came to a head one weekend when Zach and Mia were staying with us. They'd been spending more time with us lately, and honestly, it was starting to feel like they were avoiding their own house altogether. I didn't mind, of course. We loved having them around, and they seemed happier here than they did at home. But I knew it was only a matter of time before Kevin would make a fuss about it. Sure enough, that Saturday afternoon, Kevin showed up unannounced. He barged in like he owned the place, didn't even bother knocking. I was in the kitchen when I heard the front door slam, and when I went to see what was going on, there he was, standing in the middle of the living room with this angry look on his face. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. "Why are my kids always over here?" I could feel the tension in the room instantly. Zach and Mia were sitting on the couch, eyes wide, not saying a word. My husband stood up from his chair, trying to keep things calm, but you could tell he wasn't happy about the way Kevin had barged in. I didn't raise my voice, but I didn't back down either. "They want to be here, Kevin," I said. "They're welcome here anytime, you know that." Kevin shook his head, pacing back and forth. "This isn't right. They're my kids, not yours. They should be spending time with their family, with their siblings, not hiding out here all the time." At this point, Zach stood up, clearly upset. "We're not hiding, Dad. We just want some space." Kevin turned on him, his face red with anger. "Space from what? Your own family? You're always at your grandparents' house, and now your siblings don't even know you anymore." I could see Zach's fists clenching, and I knew this wasn't going to end well if I didn't step in. So I did what I always do. I tried to keep things from exploding. I stepped between them, looking Kevin right in the eye. "They're teenagers, Kevin. They need their space. You can't just force them to be around people they don't want to be around." Kevin wasn't having any of it. "This is your fault," he snapped. "You're spoiling them, giving them everything they want, and now they think they're too good for their own family. You've come between them and their siblings." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything we'd done for Zach and Mia, this guy had the nerve to accuse us of tearing the family apart? "I'm not the one who's been pushing them away, Kevin," I said, my voice steady but firm. "If Zach and Mia don't feel close to their siblings, that's on you, not us. We've been here for them when you haven't." Kevin looked like he was about to explode. "You think you're the hero in all this, don't you? You think just because you have money you can buy their love? Well, it's not working. You're making them ungrateful, and you're turning them against their own family." Now this is where I had to bite my tongue. My first instinct was to lay into him, to tell him exactly what I thought about his parenting, his choices, his whole attitude, but I knew that wasn't going to help Zach and Mia. So instead, I took a deep breath and said, "Kevin, this isn't about money. It's about making sure Zach and Mia are happy and healthy. If they're not close to their siblings, maybe you should look at why that is instead of blaming us." At this point, Zach couldn't stay quiet anymore. He stepped forward, standing next to me. "Dad, this isn't about Grandma and Grandpa. We don't feel close to our siblings because we're always taking care of them. We're not their parents, you and Cindy are. But you expect us to be their babysitters all the time, and we're tired of it." Kevin looked stunned. He clearly didn't expect Zach to stand up to him like that. For a moment, it seemed like he was going to back down, but then his anger flared up again. "Is that what you think?" he said, his voice rising. "You think you're too good to help out around the house? That's what family does, Zach. We take care of each other, but you've been too busy playing the spoiled grandkid to even care." I could see Zach's face turning red, and I knew he was on the edge of losing it. But before he could say anything, Mia, who had been quiet this whole time, finally spoke up. "We're not spoiled, Dad," she said softly but firmly. "We're just tired of being ignored. You and Cindy spend all your time with the little kids, and we're just there, like we don't even matter. So yeah, we like being at Grandma and Grandpa's house because we feel like we actually matter here." Hearing Mia say that, my heart broke a little. She was always the quiet one, the one who kept her feelings to herself. But it was clear now that this had been weighing on her for a long time. Kevin looked like someone had slapped him in the face. He opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came out. For the first time since he'd stormed in, he looked unsure of himself. I took the opportunity to step in again. Kevin, I know this is hard for you, but you can't keep blaming us for the way things are. Zach and Mia love you, but they need you to listen to them, not just tell them what they should be doing. Kevin stood there for a few more seconds, his face going through a whole range of emotions: anger, frustration, maybe even a little guilt. Finally, he just shook his head and turned toward the door. "You've made your choice," he muttered, more to himself than to us. "You've made them choose." With that, he stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. The room was silent for a long moment after he left. Zach and Mia looked shaken, like they couldn't quite believe what had just happened. My husband put a hand on Zach's shoulder. "You did good, kid," he said quietly. "You stood up for yourself. That's what matters." Zach nodded, but I could see he was still upset. Mia too. This wasn't how any of us wanted things to go, but at the same time, it felt like something had shifted. For the first time, Zach and Mia had stood up to their dad, and I think they realized that they didn't have to just accept things the way they were anymore. We didn't talk much about it that night. We watched a movie, had some dinner, tried to keep things normal. But I knew that confrontation with Kevin wasn't the end of it. It was just the beginning. Update 3. After that showdown with Kevin, things didn't get any easier. If anything, they got more complicated. Kevin stopped talking to us completely, except when it came to arranging Zach and Mia's visits. And even then, he'd keep things short, cold, like he was doing us a favor by letting them spend time with us. But honestly, I was done trying to make things work with him. My focus was Zach and Mia, and as long as they were happy, I could deal with whatever Kevin threw at us. What really surprised me, though, was how much Zach and Mia started opening up after that fight. It was like once they stood up to Kevin, they finally felt free to talk about everything they'd been holding inside. We had some long conversations during those weekends they stayed with us, and let me tell you, the stuff they'd been dealing with at home was worse than I thought. Zach admitted that he always felt like he was walking on eggshells around Kevin and Cindy. He didn't know how to act in his own house because no matter what he did, it seemed like it was never enough. He was either too distant from his half-siblings or not helpful enough around the house. And when he did step up to help, Kevin would tell him he was doing it wrong. It was a lose-lose situation for him. Mia didn't say as much, but I could tell it was weighing on her too. She told me that Cindy tried to play the cool stepmom, but it always came off as fake. Like Cindy would try to get Mia to talk about stuff or go shopping with her, but Mia could see right through it. She knew Cindy wasn't doing it because she cared about her. She was doing it to make Kevin happy. That realization hurt her more than anything. It wasn't like Zach and Mia didn't want a relationship with their half-siblings. They just didn't feel like they belonged in that new family Kevin was trying so hard to build. They felt like outsiders in their own home, and the more Kevin pushed, the more they pulled away. It was clear to them, and to us, that they were stuck in a situation they never asked for. As much as I hated hearing all this, it made me more determined than ever to give Zach and Mia the space and support they needed. We made sure that when they were with us, they didn't have to think about the chaos back home. I wasn't trying to replace Kevin. I knew that was never going to happen. But I wanted them to know they had a place where they could just be themselves, without all the drama. Then, out of nowhere, Kevin called me up one day. He hadn't spoken to me directly in weeks, so I figured it was important. His tone was different too, less angry, more desperate. I could tell right away that something had shifted. "I need your help," he said, almost like it hurt him to admit it. "I don't know what to do anymore. The kids won't listen to me, and it feels like they hate me." I wasn't sure how to respond at first. Part of me wanted to say, "Well, what did you expect?" But I held back. I knew he wasn't calling for a lecture, even though he probably deserved one. Instead, I asked, "What's going on?" He sighed heavily on the other end of the line. "It's just, they're shutting me out. Zach won't even talk to me unless it's about something practical, and Mia barely looks at me when she's home. Cindy's trying, but they're not warming up to her either. I feel like I'm losing them." I leaned against the counter, trying to process everything he was saying. This was the first time Kevin had ever shown any real vulnerability. It was like he finally realized that all his pushing and controlling wasn't working, and it was costing him his relationship with his kids. "I don't know what you want me to say, Kevin," I said, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. "You tried to force them into something they weren't ready for. You can't just expect them to fall in line. I know, he said, sounding frustrated. But I'm trying to fix it. I just don't know how. I thought about it for a moment. Part of me didn't want to get involved. It wasn't my job to fix Kevin's mistakes, and honestly, after everything he'd put us through, I didn't owe him anything. But the other part of me, the part that cared about Zach and Mia, knew that if there was any chance of making things better for them, I had to at least try. Kevin, you need to listen to them, I said, keeping my voice steady. Really listen. Stop telling them how they should feel and start asking them how they do feel. They're not little kids anymore. They're teenagers, and they've been through a lot. They need to know you're there for them, not just as their dad, but as someone who cares about what they're going through. There was a long pause on the other end. I could tell he was taking it in, trying to wrap his head around what I was saying. I don't want to lose them, he finally said, his voice almost a whisper. That's up to you, Kevin, I replied. But you need to understand that they're not going to come running back just because you ask them to. You have to earn their trust again. After that, Kevin didn't call again for a while. I wasn't sure if he was actually taking my advice or if he was just too proud to admit he needed more help. Either way, things stayed pretty much the same on our end. Zach and Mia continued spending their weekends with us, and they seemed happier for it. But every now and then, I could see that look in their eyes, the one that said they were still dealing with stuff they weren't ready to talk about. Then, about a month later, Zach came to me with something I wasn't expecting. Grandma, he said, sitting down across from me at the kitchen table. I've been thinking. I want to move in with you and Grandpa. I blinked, taken aback. What do you mean, like full-time? Zach nodded. Yeah, I can't take it at home anymore. Dad and Cindy are just... It's too much. And Mia's been talking about it too. We're both thinking about it. I didn't know what to say. I mean, of course, I wanted them to stay with us if that's what they needed. But I knew this was going to make things even messier with Kevin. Moving in with us full-time? That would be the final straw for him. Have you talked to your dad about this? I asked cautiously. Zach shook his head. Not yet. I wanted to see if it was even an option before I brought it up. But I can't stay there anymore, Grandma. I just can't. I looked at him, saw the determination in his eyes, and I knew he was serious. This wasn't just some teenage rebellion. This was Zach making a decision about what he needed for his own well-being. I'll talk to Grandpa, I said slowly, and then we'll figure out how to bring it up with your dad. Zach nodded, relief washing over his face. Thanks, Grandma. And in that moment, I realized something. No matter how much Kevin tried to push us away or guilt-trip us into doing things his way, Zach and Mia knew where they belonged. They knew they had us in their corner, and that's all that mattered.